that we have our lettering and our hearts done, we're gonna go ahead and add all the really fun parts. You can grab the color palette for this if you wanna use the same one in the blog post for this video. So the first thing we're gonna do is come over here and let's go ahead and change our background color to this pretty purple. And as mentioned in the first part of this video, we've got our lettering and our hearts each on their own layer because we're going to apply different effects to them. So let's go ahead and change our lettering color. I am going to make mine this really light pink. So I'm just gonna drag my color. There are several ways to recolor. This piece just has 4 letters, so I'll just drag that over. Now we want to make a shadow. So we're gonna go to our layers panel. We're gonna swipe left and click duplicate. We're gonna be working with the bottom layer. So let's go ahead and tap that and rename, actually we did our extrusion first. So that is our 3D element. And let's grab a slightly darker pink. With that layer selected, come over here to your magic wand tool. And we are going to do a motion blur on the layer and just a slight one up towards the top left. So let's touch our pencil down and go to maybe, let's do like a 30%. Now we're gonna go back to our layer and tap select, tap the layer again and tap fill. And you're gonna repeat that process about 5 times. So just keep selecting and filling the layer. And then we're going to grab our arrow tool and slide that into place. Tap it over just a little. And so now we've got our extrusion. Next, we're going to make our shadow. So now we're going to swipe left, duplicate that layer again. Again, we'll tap and rename to keep everything organized. Shadow. And this time I'm gonna grab a dark gray color. And again, we'll come up to the magic wand tool, choose motion blur once again on the layer, and we're gonna drag this way this time, about the same. So last time we did, I think 30%, so we're gonna go to about 30% again. It doesn't have to be super exact. And then we're gonna go through that same process of select, fill, select, fill. And if you wanna keep this one a little fuzzier and not quite as opaque, you could do just like 3 fills. And again, grab your arrow tool, slide it into place. And then we're gonna tap the N on that layer and take the opacity way down, maybe 10 or 11% to start. I'm gonna go to like 7% there. So just a subtle little shadow. Okay, so let's go ahead and recolor our hearts. So with the hearts layer selected and a light teal color, I'm going to recolor those. And this heart is a little too close to my lettering, so I'm gonna grab my selection tool here, and I have it on freehand. And I'm just gonna circle this, grab my arrow tool, and move it over just a little bit. All right, so now we could add a halftone texture to that. To do that, we're going to add a layer above it, and let's rename it halftone so we know that that's what's on that layer. And then we are going to tap it again and apply a clipping mask so that what we put on this layer only applies to our hearts. And then I'm gonna grab a darker teal color in the halftone shader. Right now, I've got it kind of a mid-size, so we'll try that and see if we need to adjust. And I'm just gonna color half of my heart. Can you see that on camera? And I'm gonna repeat that. And if you feel like that color is not enough contrast, you can grab an even darker teal. So if I grab like a darker teal here, it's even more pronounced. I think I actually like the lighter one. So I'm gonna double tap to undo that and then just color that. So if we turned off if we turned alpha lock off on that layer, here's what would happen. I'm sorry, not alpha lock, clipping mask. So you can see it's all over exactly where I colored it, but when we apply the clipping mask, it sticks to what's on the layer below it. So it's just on our hearts, but that makes it on its own layer easy to change that color. So if we wanted to change that to purple or pink or any color, it's much easier on that separate layer than it would be if we were coloring directly on our hearts. All right, so let's go in and add some textures to our other elements. For the lettering, let's go in and add another layer, and we're gonna rename this one Coarse Grit. And I am going to grab a darker pink color. And this time I won't add the clipping mask until after. So we're gonna get the Coarse Grit brush, and I've got it on the largest size here. And if you watch my other video, one important thing when you're using these brushes is you don't want to lift your pencil the whole time you color. So color and keep your pencil down until you've got all of your lettering covered. All right, everything is covered, so I can release my pencil from the page. And now I will tap that layer and apply the clipping mask, and it stays just on that layer. And I'm going to tap the N, and I think I'm gonna make that a color burn and reduce the opacity so it's a little more subtle. I'm gonna go with around 50%. So now if I zoom in, you can see we've got that nice grit texture applied. And this part of the V overlaps, so we wanna make that stand out a little more. So we're gonna do another layer, and I'm actually gonna drag that below my Coarse Grit so the Coarse Grit applies to both. You can see when I do that, it auto applies a clipping mask. And we are going to rename this layer Speckled Shader because that's what we're gonna use. So grab the Speckled Shader brush, and I'm gonna get a slightly darker pink again. And just like in my last video, if you watched the last tutorial, how I do this usually is I grab the freehand selection tool, and then I just draw a little circle in the area I want to add some shading. So then I'll just gently do a little shading here and maybe dot it out so it gives it kind of an ombre kind of style, so it's heavier at the bottom and lighter as it goes up. And that is done, but we want to do it on this side as well. So again, we'll grab our selection tool, and we want to make it look like that line of the V swash is going over the other line. So again, we will add a little texture here, go over the darker area a few times, and tap a few out. Now, if we zoom out, you can see how that adds some dimension. And again, I'm gonna grab this letter N and change my opacity so it's a little more subtle. I'll go with around 50% again. So now we've got all that done. We are going to add some textures to our extrusion layer. So go to your extrusion and add another layer. And this time we're going to add some fine grit texture. So let's rename that as Fine Grit. And then again, I'm on a darker pink already, so that's good. I'll grab a fine grit texture. I'm gonna make it as big as I can. And I'm just gonna color with my pencil down the whole time all over my extrusion layer. And then again, I'll tap that layer and select clipping mask so it stays on just that layer. And I'm gonna do the color burn on this time again. So just tap your N and then come over here to color burn. And then I like to play with the opacity again, so it's a little more subtle. So I'm gonna go with around 40% this time. And then again, if I zoom in, you can see all that nice, lovely texture. And we'll take it one step further and add one more little element to our extrusion. We're gonna add another layer again, drag it below that one, which will auto apply the clipping mask. And we'll rename this one Halftone. And again, we're gonna grab our Halftone shader brush, and we're gonna think about where the shadows would be in this. So you wanna picture your sun and think about where the areas would be darker on your back layer here. So usually in the crevices and the underneath of letters, there are darker areas. So this one, since it's underneath the L, would be a little darker right here and here. And I just add some subtle extra texture all over. Sometimes you have to think about it for a minute when you go through and think about where the shadows would be. Any little crevices, those areas, you can add some extra texture. And then again, if we zoom in, you can see that we've got 2 layers of texture now. And for that one, I don't think I'm gonna mess with the opacity or the color burn or anything like that. So that completes our piece. So you could add some more texture to the background, you can layer more different things, but I wanted to just kind of show you exactly how I did this promo piece for the texture brushes. This was my original drawing, so I had that nearby so I could reference it. And then in the blog post, I will put a screenshot for you of all the layers and what I named them and what I used, and you'll see where I did color burn and things like that. And that will be in the blog post for you to download and reference as you work through the post as well.